Hey everybody, Tom Barnes, stories from the 78, talking about things for Veterans Day. And there's an amazing new exhibit at Midway Airport, and Midway Airport, I feel like, does a great job of honoring veterans. And I brought my friend in Patricia Will of the senior Belmont. I don't want to get the name wrong, Patricia, so why don't you just finish it for me there?
Okay, I'm the founder and CEO of Belmont Village Senior Living.
Yeah, so I had it backwards. So talk about the exhibit that you guys are working on with the veterans, specifically World War II veterans.
Yes. So the exhibit at Midway, and of course, Midway is very symbolic, having been one of the biggest naval battles really in the history. The exhibit at Midway is a collaboration between us and the vision of Airport Commissioner Ree, where Belmont had been capturing portraits of veterans who live with us, particularly while we still can, veterans of World War II. And we commissioned a young and very talented photographer named Tom Sanders to capture portraits of these veterans, but also to tell their stories. Commissioner Ree learned about this and decided with us to create a permanent exhibit at Midway of the veterans that we've captured, with half the exhibit dedicated to veterans in Chicago. And these portraits of service capture not only the image of these wonderful veterans, how and where they served, but very often still have within the portraits memorabilia of their uniforms, their hats, other artifacts of the wars in which they served. They also form the catalysts to tell their stories. And many of these vets, as we take their photographs, come forward with stories that nobody's ever heard before, including their family members.
I know, I find that very surprising because it happened with my grandfather. He died when I was 6 years old, but I talked to my grandmother about it when she was getting near the end of her life. She lived to be in her 90s, so we only lost her a few years ago, but she said that a lot of stories that she heard about my grandfather, she heard from his friends about World War II. I didn't know that he wasn't at Pearl Harbor, but he was in Hawaii when Pearl Harbor was bombed. None of us knew that. None of us. And my grandma just kind of casually mentions it. I tell my dad, and he's like, he never told me about that. So it's just like this thing where a lot of them just didn't tell their families. So it's great that we're getting these stories.
Yeah, we started this project in early 2009, and we continuously replenish the Veterans Library. We have the largest collection of veteran photography of veterans of wars, actually in the country, if not the world, having captured the images of all of these veterans and continuing to do it. What is really extraordinary on Wednesday when the exhibit was launched is that we had 10 veterans whose photographs are in the exhibit, most of which are World War II vets, at the exhibit to share their stories. And the oldest of those, Myron Petrakis, who lives with us in Carroll Stream, is 100 years old. He's as eloquent as you and me, Tom.
He's probably more so than me. But
and he shared not only his experience as a machinist in the Navy, but he shared his experience of when the war was over for everybody, more or less. Those guys who were in the minesweepers, in his case in the Korean Straits, were still getting killed. And he lost a lot of friends after the war was officially over, who were in minesweepers that were trying to clean up the seas after the war.
Wow.
And
those stories fall on deaf ears sometimes where people just don't know. It's so great that you guys are capturing these amazing stories.
Well, we hope that everybody comes to see this exhibit in Midway and also comes to see the exhibits that we have in our communities of even more of these people, because it's just extraordinary.
Where in Midway Airport exactly should people be looking for this particular exhibit?
It's in the corridor in Midway that goes from the main airport to public transit. It's that
Okay,
entire corridor. So if you're taking
perfect.
CTA, you go down there, and it was really wonderful to watch people who were actually at Midway because they're going somewhere, stop spellbound, and then say, "Oh my God, I got to make a flight," because they wanted to look at every picture and hear every story.
Yeah, just being in the news business for a long time here in Chicago, you do different stories throughout, and you find that there are different factions of the U.S. military that had direct impacts in World War II. And not that the other ones didn't, but I'm talking like, battalions or different squadrons that were like in Hitler's nest in Germany, like capturing that after like the first Americans to do it. Those soldiers, a lot of them were from Chicago. It just happened to work out that way where, unfortunately, you hear about these stories as they pass because all of a sudden their families are finding all these old souvenirs that they kept that were like, how do they get this? And then they look at it and like, oh my gosh, this is from Berlin from 1940, or 1943 or whatever have you. So these stories are so great. And yes, they've been depicted in movies, but those are movies. To hear it from the person's mouth or on a piece of paper that they wrote on to convey that message, I feel like it's an American duty to be able to capture these stories, to hold on to them, to tell future generations, not only to remind them of what happened, but what the sacrifices were for a generation of Americans that fought for freedom, a freedom that, in today's society, I think maybe some people might be taking it for granted versus others. And what that freedom really is what those folks fought for. And I think it's so important that we remember it. It's so great that it is on display of all places. Midway Airport's a great spot.
It is a great spot. It's very, very fitting. And the city of Chicago is really so diverse. And to see the diversity of these vets is another very important part of it. They came from all walks of life. They came from all faiths. We have people that were literally in the camps themselves that escaped and then enlisted. Just amazing stories.
I almost feel like it was like different kind of people, but I'm so glad that I can call my grandparents of that generation. I'm so proud of them and my dad and my uncles and everybody that's fought for our freedom, for our country. If there's people that want to know more about it or are looking to get involved in any way, is there a website people can go to?
Yeah, they can go to our website, which is belmontvillage.com. And they will be able to get a link that tells them all about the exhibit and the veterans. And there's actually a beautiful picture book that was published that captures these photographs as well.
Fantastic. Patricia, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it a lot.
Tom, thanks for the opportunity.